From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Here's what's ahead. Providing this week's cattle market commentary, Lee Schulz of Iowa State University. He'll break down the USDA's latest cattle on feed report, and Lee shares a new analysis he co-authored on trends in dairy beef prices and how those might serve as an indicator of future beef cattle prices. Then K-State's Justin Waggoner talks about managing mineral supplementation for the cow herd this fall and winter in light of escalating mineral prices. And later, Kansas FFA state reporter Lydia Watanabe will look ahead with Shelby Varner to the 2021 National FFA Convention taking place this week in Indianapolis. All that here on Agriculture Today. Welcome to our Monday edition of Agriculture Today. Cattle market observations for you first here, as usual, to open the week. And this time, we turn to a livestock economist out of Iowa State University. Lee Schulz is back with us. We've some interesting information that he's worked up along with one of his colleagues at Iowa State on dairy beef prices and how they might be actually forecasters of beef cattle prices overall. More on that later on. But Lee, the trade this past week seems like the fed cattle market was, well, frankly, waiting for indicators from the cattle on feed report we'll be discussing shortly.
That may be the best way to look at it. I mean, we continue the flat pattern generally in fed cattle trade. You know, if you look at Southern Plains, I think they were in about 124 on a live basis. A little bit better, maybe 124 to 126 in Nebraska. You know, I heard some pretty strong bids, you know, maybe some tops of 127 here in Iowa. You know, I think that's a bit stronger than last week. But futures was really down throughout the week, so maybe kind of waiting for some positive signals. And that's both fed cattle and feeder cattle when you look at the futures market. Feeder cattle, I think, certainly a reaction to a stronger corn market this last week that provided a little bit of bearish tone there. Was there anything on the fed cattle futures side, though, apart from needing signals from the cattle on feed report that was bringing extra pressure this week? Well, you know, I kind of scanned peripherally the various factors, and, you know, I don't think there was generally anything that was really suppressing it per se. I mean, I think, you know, maybe some technicals that, you know, I've heard some talk that maybe it was overbought a little bit. But it's important to remember we're still kind of trading in the ranges we've traded in. So importantly there, it isn't a downtrend or anything. I think, you know, just that choppy sideways trade we've kind of been in for quite a while now. Right to what we've been referring to, that USDA monthly cattle on feed report. And in the two categories that seem to draw the most interest, the overall count and the placements number, both of those figures came out to be somewhat friendly to the trade, didn't they? So if we're looking at a reaction, I mean, there's some bullish undertones here. Cattle on feed down below a year ago. That was generally in the range of pre-report expectations, maybe a little bit down compared to the average. But the big surprise was placements. So placements were down from a year ago, but considerably down from what pre-report expectations were. Now, I'll note there's a pretty wide range there, which there usually is. But being down, I think that does provide certainly some support in the marketplace. I think there's a little bit of debate what that placement number would look like, because we had placed a lot of lighter weight calves because of drought conditions in a lot of areas. But, you know, overall, the placement number was down. You know, where it was down significantly was the heavier weight placements, which, you know, I think that has indications as we get into spring and what those fed cattle supplies look like. I'll remind us one more thing on this is, you know, when you look at September, the first 2 weeks of September, futures prices really dropped for fed cattle. So there wasn't a lot of incentive to place cattle at that point. So maybe that delayed that placement decision.
Anyway, it's good to see numbers that are supportive of the market, and that appears to be the case with the Cattle on Feed report out Friday. There's also been a new cold storage report posted, Lee, and is that allowing any further market indicators here?
Well, I think it if anything, it adds a bit of the bullish tone too. Numbers continue to be below year-ago levels, below what we've seen in 2019 is maybe more of a typical time. But we do see that products start to build up month over month, which we would expect. Overall, this is an indication that prices have been strong really throughout the year. So a lot of that product hasn't made it to cold storage because we've just seen strong demand for it. And exports continue to be strong. And so we haven't needed to really stage that product for as long. And so you continue to see the movement there. When we compare to the pork industry, pork is down considerably from kind of normal times. And so I think that's important from a perspective standpoint that we do have a little bit of buffer there, right? That there is supplies. And I look at that from an export standpoint that, make sure we're not missing any export sales. We do have sufficient, I think, cold storage supplies, but they are tighter than what we've seen historically.
What we'd like to do here, Lee, in our remaining time is dive into some material that you put together in an article. And this is stemming from work that a colleague of yours and you at Iowa State, Christopher Pudens, had joined with you on this. And you entitled this, Can Dairy Beef Prices Foretell Future Price Trends? Linking that to the general beef market here. What prompted this and what are you getting at with it?
So what prompted it, we have to really go back a long, long ways. This was really my kind of first look into research. What got me interested in the research, you could argue 20 years ago is kind of the dairy beef market. Now, part of that is I'm from Wisconsin, right? So that's a huge market there. So it's always been something that I've kind of followed. And then if you rewind here, about 5 years or so, we had a big change in the dairy beef market. One packer came out and said they were no longer going to procure fed dairy beef. You could think about it as fed dairy Holsteins. And that had a big implication for the marketplace. When you look at the spread between beef type prices and dairy prices, that widened significantly. And kind of what led to this article was twofold. One was looking at basis levels. So how does that impact our ability to forecast basis, which is really important for hedging, for price forecasting. But the other thing is you can think of this as a natural experiment. As if we reduce slaughter capacity, what does that do to prices? And really this was before slaughter capacity issues we've seen in the beef market over the last couple of years in 2019 and 2020. And so, it kind of led that situation. So it gave us an ability to kind of look at it in an interesting natural experiment that went on in the market.
What you did then, and in summary fashion here, if you might, you wanted to determine basically what dramatic structural change, such as the situation with dairy beef, does suggest about the pressure that might be brought to bear on the conventional beef cattle basis.
Yep. As an economist, I'll say it depends, right? And so, it depends on how I sell those cattle, be it at the auction market, be it as direct trade, but that could even be a variety of ways from formula to forward contract. So the impact of reduction in slaughter capacity is different depending on a lot of factors, including how I sell the cattle, the weight of the cattle, and some other factors that we looked at. So we help to really quantify that. What I think is important and that we highlight is that things have settled down or kind of came back into the normal situation. So what does that mean? Well, markets work the situation out. Now, this took for a while, right? I mean, if we go back, first impact was really in 2016, and we're kind of seeing that dairy basis get back to normal levels now. You can see it took several years. So how does that kind of foretell future trends? Well, we can see that as we had these big shocks in the beef market in 2019 and 2020, we will see the market adjust. And I think we're already seeing that in fed cattle prices. They are starting to increase. Basis levels are getting back to normal. And so we can go back to kind of the economic and market fundamentals in understanding how prices will move going forward.
Yeah. Interesting analysis here, and might bring this in. Do you see application of what you just described here to this, call it a phenomenon that we see going on right now, where dairy producers are now going beef on dairy in their breeding programs to improve the quality of those dairy beef animals? Does this have any relevance to that?
Well, I think it certainly does. And to go more broad, anytime you see a shock, producers are very entrepreneurial, right? And they're going to adjust to that shock. And sometimes that speeds some trends faster than you would have already seen. So when you see in such a large discount for Holstein steer calves, for example, that incentivizes producers to make a production change. Now, there's a lot of reasons that you're seeing producers breed dairy cows and heifers to beef bulls, but one of the factors was this large discount of dairy steers. And so, that certainly moved this market, I think, maybe faster than normally would have been the case without that shock because of the incentive to do that.
It's an interesting read, and you can go to Lee's website at Iowa State University and check it out. It's called Can Dairy Beef Prices Foretell Future Price Trends? Lee, we'll have you back in a few weeks. As always, many thanks.
Thank you.
Lee Schulz is a livestock economist at Iowa State University. He's one of those who regularly contributes to our cattle market segment here on Agriculture Today. Welcome back. You're listening to Agriculture Today. You beef cattle producers are becoming well acquainted with it, as are so many others in production agriculture. The cost of inputs are definitely on the rise, and the mineral that you might use in your feeding programs, no exception there. Justin Waggoner is with us, beef systems specialist with K-State Research and Extension. He's based in southwest Kansas. And everybody's seeing it happen with just about every input one could think about right now, Justin. But why the spike specifically in mineral prices right now?
Well, it's, just like you said, Eric, we're seeing this across the board in several other areas. And, beef cattle mineral probably isn't one of the areas that we would expect to see that price increase translate over into. However, we are expecting to see higher prices for mineral as we get into the fall and even on into the spring booking season of 2022. Most of that's going to be due to kind of the convergence of several factors. One of the things we've been talking about in the farming sector is the rapid rate at which we've seen our fertilizer input prices go up. Many of the same phosphorus sources that would go into those fertilizer products are also utilized to make beef cattle minerals. And so as we see commodity prices go up, fertilizer input prices go up, the value of that phosphorus that's being put into those mineral products is going to follow suit. Some other factors at play here, just the simple act of moving commodities across the U.S. in terms of our fuel prices and freight, those are going up as well. Some of the other components that would go into a mineral mix are produced in other countries, and so those are going to be subject to some of the backlogs that we're currently seeing at some of our ports of entry. So, as you begin to see all the convergence of those factors, which have been discussed at length and how they've impacted a variety of operations in the ag sector, mineral is going to be impacted as well as we move into the fall and the spring.
Unless a producer can find a way to price mineral cheaply amidst this rise, then are there things in the management sense they can do? What should they concentrate on?
Well, I think in terms of the mineral programs, the level of phosphorus is one of the areas in which we can focus on. It is one of the primary reasons that we supplement cows with a mineral product. The other thing is, what many people don't realize is phosphorus is one of the most common mineral deficiencies basically around the globe. So we can focus on supplement selection and also taking into account the other sources of phosphorus that might be available to our cows, because it is a total diet issue. So all sources of phosphorus that would come into the diet. That would include native range as well as any of the supplements that we would feed, and then making sure that we're providing a mineral product that's going to do a good job of matching those cow requirements in light of those other sources of dietary phosphorus that would come into the diet.
Well, then lend some guidelines on selecting a mineral product.
Sure.
What should one go by? Obviously, the content, the makeup of that mineral.
So we know that there's lots of different products out there in terms of the phosphorus levels of minerals. And that's, it used to be historically we'd see a 12% phosphorus mineral. That was pretty common. Today we have a variety of products to choose from that would range from 4% phosphorus all the way up to that traditional 12%. So the first step that I recommend is actually taking into account what we're going to have in terms of our grazed forage resources. And so dormant forage is going to contain less phosphorus than what we would see during the spring of the growing season. The range we would see in Kansas is somewhere between 0.05% phosphorus all the way up to 0.2 and in some instances 0.3. So it can contribute a fair amount to the diet, especially on a cow that's consuming 25 to 30 pounds of native range during the grazing season, depending on whether we're in the fall or we're in the spring. The other source that we often overlook would be our protein supplements. Many of the products that we would use to supplement a cow with protein throughout the winter months also bring a fair amount of phosphorus to the table. Commercial range cubes, if we look at dried distillers grains, if we look at cottonseed meal, corn gluten, those are all going to have, in some cases, a fair amount of phosphorus in them, ranging from 0.75 to even 1% in some cases of phosphorus that would come into the diet. If we look at a mature 1,400-pound beef cow, peak lactation, her phosphorus requirement in terms of grams per day is going to be around 29 grams per day. If we look at 3 pounds of dried distillers grains, that's going to provide about 11 grams of phosphorus per day to that cow. So that's about 37% of that cow's requirement that would come from that byproduct that we're using for protein supplementation. So taking into account those dietary sources of phosphorus can be a good step for producers to look at if they're looking at ways to potentially maybe reduce the cost of their mineral program this fall and into the spring.
But as far as the commercial mineral itself and purchasing that product, because you'll have to likely go some distance with that, does one study the percentage of phosphorus in a given product?
Yeah, so some good guidelines to look for there would be so let's talk about a cow that's at maintenance. So if we have a 12 or 1,400-pound cow, those would kind of bracket what we would tend to see out there in the state of Kansas. And those cows are going to be consuming some dormant grass somewhere between that 0.05 and that 0.1 level. The amount of phosphorus that we would need in a mineral product to meet the requirements of that 1,200-pound cow would be a 6 to 10% phosphorus mineral, obviously depending on the amount of phosphorus that's in that grass that they would be consuming. So if we average that 10 and 6, that's about an 8% phosphorus in the mineral product, would do a fairly good job of meeting those cows' requirements through the winter months for maintenance. As we increase the size of that cow to a 1,400-pound beef cow, that range on that mineral product would be 8 to 12. So we're really looking at about a 10% phosphorus mineral would fit a variety of those scenarios there. Now, if we take into account gestation, the last third of gestation specifically, when we'd see those requirements increase, it's going to take a mineral that would contain 6 to 10% phosphorus. Now, that's a pretty wide range, but given that, we could be in the latter thirds of gestation in February, we could be in the latter third of gestation in March, in some instances on a particular operation. So there is a wider range there. The range in the percent phosphorus in the mineral would be 6 to 10%. So we're still looking at an average of about an 8% phosphorus mineral would bracket most of those scenarios. Kind of, I think the take-home message there is oftentimes producers don't realize that even without accounting for the phosphorus in those protein supplements, the actual amount of phosphorus in a mineral mix that we would need to meet those requirements is fairly low. 6% will do a very good job of meeting those cows' phosphorus requirements throughout a good amount of the production cycle.
Because the phosphorus mineral product is being provided free choice, are there any efficiencies to be gained in the presentation of the product beyond what we normally do?
Yeah, so obviously one of the things we have to keep in mind in any type of self-fed situation is we're going to see some variability in intake. So we want to make sure those products are very palatable. It's oftentimes a good double check when you do purchase a mineral product to look at those target intake levels. We'll see products that are available for producers that'll range from a 2-ounce per head per day consumption target all the way up to a 6-ounce per day consumption level. Probably more common is to see products that would target a 3 to 4-ounce consumption, but most of that information is going to be found on the mineral tag. So it's always a good place to start to see what that target consumption level is. And then the second check of that is, are you actually getting that consumption on the herd? And that can be a more difficult situation to kind of get a handle on. But we have problems with both overconsumption in mineral programs as well as underconsumption. And in some instances, we can even create production deficiencies just simply by the fact that the cattle didn't consume the product. So it's always a good idea to read that mineral tag and then make sure that we are actually getting some rough approximation of what that target consumption level would be on those products.
And extra level of monitoring that consumption, eyeballing it then, good idea here?
Well, typically, mineral comes in 50-pound sacks or so, and so we would hope that we would know the head count within a given pasture unit, and so we can do some rough math to see what that would look like if we're relatively on target for a week's consumption with those cows.
This is important, though, although it is a phase of cow herd management that usually is routine. Not so this year. So you would like producers to contemplate their mineral management maybe a little more closely than normal.
Absolutely. I mean, I think mineral is something we often take for granted in the beef cattle production cycle. To a producer, though, when you're looking at products, $25 to $30 per bag is not uncommon if we were to price those products on a per ton basis. They are quite expensive, and so it's always an expense in the balance sheet, regardless of whether we're talking about feed or mineral programs. And there's certainly an opportunity here to maybe look at some potential cost savings, especially as we look at kind of an unexpected increase in the price of these products and really kind of realizing and doing a better job of targeting our phosphorus level in our mineral programs to deliver. We can always deliver more, right, but maybe sometimes that's not cost-effective for us to do so. And I think we're coming into a scenario where it really would be beneficial to take a little bit of extra time, sharpen those pencils, and kind of look at our programs and seeing exactly what we need to meet those cows' requirements.
That's helpful input as producers will be contending with those higher mineral prices probably for a while, through the winter, if nothing else. So, Justin, thanks for passing all of that along. Always appreciate your time.
Thanks, Eric.
Beef Systems Specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Justin Waggoner there, and some things to think about in regard to managing your mineral inputs for your cow herd in the coming months here on Agriculture Today. We'll be back with this week's glance at the K-State agricultural calendar for you. After you hear this is the K-State Radio Network. We're back on Agriculture Today, and we're around to that weekly segment that previews agricultural events and happenings that K-State has a hand in the coming days. And one of those would be a major event, some would call it the main event, for Kansas FFA members, which is set to go later this week. We'll hand it on over now to Agriculture Today's Shelby Varner. Shelby?
The 94th National FFA Convention is happening October 27th through the 30th, and Kansas FFA state reporter from the Ark City chapter, Lydia Watanabe, is in to share a little bit about it. Lydia, what are some of these events from the National Convention that are happening?
There's going to be a lot of fun things happening in Indiana. One of my most favorites that I've attended in the past are the sessions that are held in Lucas Oil Stadium. We get to hear national officers say their retiring address. We also get to attend, if you're a delegate, some workshops hosted by national officer candidates. So I'm actually one of the delegates for the Membership Experience Committee. So I'm super excited about that. So it's more than just competing in CDEs or LDEs or speaking on stage. It's about how we wear the corduroy jackets and have the sense of, serving others and have that selfless heart and make this organization so much better.
Are there any Kansas chapters that are going to compete?
Yes, there are quite a few, and those chapters are Labette County FFA, Iola FFA, Minneapolis, Paola, Lewisburg, Tonganoxie, Wamego, Uniontown. Yeah, quite a few.
Sounds like Kansas is going to be well represented. Are there any business items that are going to be discussed, and what are they?
I mentioned a little bit about the delegate committees. So there's quite a few, and us state officers are divided into those committees. And like I said, for my membership experience committee, I'm specifically on the scholarship committee. So we're going to discuss how people can earn scholarships through FFA and just live out those experiences that they've had in FFA. And I know the other state officers are involved in super cool committees too, so I'm sure they're going to do great in those.
That was Kansas FFA State Reporter Lydia Watanabe. The 94th National FFA Convention is happening in Indianapolis October 27th through the 30th. Also coming up is the Central Kansas Beef Summit, happening on Wednesday, November 3rd at the Phillips County Fair Building in Phillipsburg, Kansas. This event is sponsored by numerous extension districts. Phillips Rook's agricultural agent, Rachel Brook.
It starts at 8:30 that morning with registration. The welcome and introductions get kicked off at 9, and we'll be going all day till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Hope that all of our livestock producers can come out and attend and enjoy a good lunch and some good refreshments as well.
One of the speakers at the event will be Oklahoma State University livestock economist Daryl Peel.
He's one of our lead speakers for the day. Our keynote starts at 10 a.m., so like I said, it's a don't-miss event. Sure want to be there for his presentation. But also joining us that day, first thing that morning at 9:10 is Dr. Sandy Johnson, one of our K-State specialists, and she'll be going over preg checking as well as managing opens. We've got Dr. Greg Hanslacek, Dr. Justin Waggoner, and then Stacy Minson with our watershed district, and they're going to be covering weaning considerations, feed inventory, and then water as well. One of our other big things that we're really looking forward to in the afternoon is our producer panel. They're all cattle producers that are doing different things. They'll have some good tips and tricks for those that are looking for something different for their own cattle operations.
That was agricultural agent from the Phillips Rooks District, Rachel Brook. Registration for this event is $10 if done before October 27th. Registration at the door is $15. Contact any of these extension districts to register in advance. Phillips Rooks, Central Kansas, Cottonwood, Midway, Post Rock, River Valley, or Walnut Creek. For Agriculture Today, I'm Shelby Varner.
Shelby, thank you. And that's our time for today. Thanks to you for listening in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.